Great, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I'm Johnny Lee, and we'll be starting our program on domestic violence in the workplace. And just to do a little housekeeping first, just to go over the agenda initially, we'll discuss focusing on this webinar today is looking at impact and why businesses need to care about this issue and why it's so important. The other things we could be looking at certainly is insurance, interruptions at work, and of course the cost of the violence. Related to that, of course, is employment law. This isn't going to be a big focus on employment law, but just want to address some of the issues in particular around Alabama state law. Then we'll look at what organizations can do, policies, procedures, offering support measures, and also accountability measures for abuser employees as well. We'll be looking at what community resources are available and why we should be doing this beyond, limiting your impact. But there's progressive, positive things, impact that can boost the bottom line by taking these measures. I hope that all sounds good. Joan, was there anything that you think we're going to be talking about there today?
I think that you covered it.
Great, excellent. For those of you who might be starting off new with some webinars or GoToMeeting, there's this user interface, and you might have this little tab. You could minimize or maximize the screen, and then you have some options here. The main one I want to point you towards is the Questions tab. Joan and I are fine with you interrupting or asking questions along the way. I'll be trying to keep an eye on those questions so we can answer them along the way. But of course, at the end, we'll stop and see if anyone has any questions as well. And if you really want to speak, like you got something to say, we can unmute your microphone as well, and you could verbally join the conversation. Let's see. One thing I just want to first do is introduce ourselves. If I may, Joan, an old friend, Joan and I have done a lot of work in producing conferences, and Joan Sulzman's with the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Joan, is there anything else you want to add about yourself there?
Just that I've been doing this work for a lot of years, and one thing that I have learned and continue to see is that when I first started talking about domestic violence, I had to convince people that this was a problem. I find myself still having to convince people that this is a problem. And so what we're going to talk about today, I think, will help people to understand how it's still something that more people need to know about and need to know what the resources are in order to help victims and to stop abusers.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're right. It's really trying to, if I could say, in terms of working with employers, trying to convince them that it's an employment issue or workplace issue is a real challenge. Joan, sorry, I should have created a slide for you. I created one for me. I don't know what that says about myself, but that's a little bit about myself. You can contact me. If I may encourage, if anyone's involved with LinkedIn at all, I'm pretty busy there, and there's many very rich discussions around workplace safety, domestic violence, and stalking, and it's a great place to continue the conversation. But contact me anytime if there's anything I could do to help your organization, or if you just have questions. Oh yeah.
Just like to add that if anyone has any questions about domestic violence, contacts and information in the state, that I'm with the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And the website is www.acadv.org. And there it is.
Yes.
And we have a lot of information there as well.
I know you provide a lot of resources in community education and networking and a lot of opportunities. So it's a great resource. Absolutely.
Okay.
If I may, I'm just going to give one quick example, and then maybe we could talk about what is domestic violence. Sadly enough, this was one incident that occurred a number of years ago. And if I may say, I collect these cases, and I don't want to use the term typical, but this happens so often. The one mantra, the thing I try to tell employers is, if a victim is moved out or is staying in an undisclosed location in a shelter, the one place you could always find someone is, because we all need to eat, is at work. And so in this case, you could see this such typical, it's It happens so often. There's a murder and then a suicide, and it's every time I hear about a woman dying and there's a woman dying and a suicide, it just automatically we know it's a domestic situation. This is what we're trying to prevent. These are the things that we're trying to stop from occurring, and we can look at the workplace as a tool to help prevent this. Joan, if I can ask, just for those people who have no concept of the ideas, can you talk a little about what is domestic violence?
Sure. First of all, to know that victims and abusers come from all cultures, ages, religions, sexual orientation, educational background, and income level. It is not about anger. Anger is a very normal emotion for us to have, but that's sometimes how it is expressed. Abuse is about an attempt to gain power and control, excuse me, in an intimate relationship. Most what we see is that women are still disproportionately the victims of domestic violence. There are men who are victims as well, and we do see more and more men coming forward and disclosing about the abuse that may be happening in their relationship. But to have some idea of the foundation and what the dynamics are in an abusive relationship, I think, Johnny, you have a slide of the power and control wheel, which is our go-to resource as a visual in order to be able to get some understanding of what it is that we're looking at. Now, this is the teen power and control wheel, but that's similar to the tactics that an abuser will use. And you can see we have a whole lot of wheels that we use as resources because we find this as a pretty quick and effective way to look at domestic violence. So around the rim, you see that there's always this feeling threat of physical or sexual violence relationship. Each of the spokes represents what tactic the abuser will use to try and gain that power and control. Abusers are very dependent on their relationship, a reflection of how they believe things should happen and how they should operate in the world. So when we look at these individually, I'm not going to go in order. I'm kind of just going to go randomly. And, isolation is one of the one of those. What that means is cutting someone off, contact with friends, exerting that control that results in social isolation. And Johnny will talk a little bit later about that's why the work is so important for a victim who has employment, because it gives her a chance to be in an environment where she can be in contact with others. That isolation. What happens when someone that continues, that feelings of dependency on the abuser. The
Absolutely.
I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I was saying absolutely right. I'm sorry.
It's okay. The emotional abuse just slowly destroys any self-concept that someone has. And this happens through verbal insults, undermining someone's judgment, stepping in to take over with the children or with any other activities that she may be doing, calling her crazy, calling names. Very typical is prolonged interrogations about where she has been, shopping, visits, telephone conversations. So there's no sense of privacy, and someone eventually begins to feel not just sad, but to start blaming themselves and turning it in on themselves that this is somehow their fault, because that's the message that they keep hearing. The intimidation creates a climate of fear, threatening to harm, threatening to kill, actually hurting, maiming, killing animals, slashing clothing, breaking furniture. cause feelings of anxiety and fear.
Yep.
Throughout all this coercion, it's unpredictable. There's always what the abuser wants. Victims survive day to day about what it is that are going to keep things stable, what's to help, what is it that she can do, second guessing, knowing exactly what it is that may incident or a verbal assault. So there's certainly feelings of hopelessness that develop because of that. One of the primary reasons that is in a relationship is the economic abuse. That there is no control of the income in the family, that there is no control over the, there may be a salary, but she may get a $50 allowance for food for she and the children for the month. This is not something I'm making up. This is something that in a victim's life, someone I work with, her from getting a job, keeping a job. Very often, a victim can lose her job because of abuser's harassment, and Johnny will talk about that. This causes financial dependency, which means how easy is it to leave when you think about stepping out that door with bags full of your belongings, with the children by the hand, door shut, and may not have a job, not have a place to go. I think, Johnny, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, that really, I mean, golly, you can have a 3-day workshop on what is domestic violence.
I realize I was, you just stop now.
Yes, no problem. But it's a huge, and please, I think the points you made earlier regarding it's people always think about just the physical violence, but there's a whole pattern of abuse, and we'll certainly be focusing on the economic issue and the importance of a workplace.
Okay, so
Great.
If you would like to continue.
Thank you. So as we don't know all the details of this case, but we can imagine the same issues of that power and control, I'm certain were taking place in this situation. Okay, so Joan and I are out here, and I bet many of our attendees out here trying to stop domestic violence is to help victims. Oh, one caveat, I'm sorry. And Joan, you might have mentioned this. We might say he and she, but as Joe mentioned, men and men employees can certainly be victims as well with female abusers or in homosexual relationships. But just make a caveat about that. All right, but let's talk about employers. Why should employers care? That's one real goal that we have, is to not just to appeal to people's sense of empathy or moral justice issues, but let's talk money. Let's talk business. Let's talk about the bottom line. And without a doubt, it's been well proven that domestic violence is a workplace issue. Just broadly, I'm going to just touch on sort of this broad theme here. We all know that the cost of health care, it's really very difficult. I'll just cover a little item about that. Also, we'll look at, even though the abusive behavior and the abuser may never come to the workplace, the abuse outside of work has a huge impact on job performance. And then, unfortunately, victims also are harassed at work as well. And then finally, we'll talk about the worst of the worst is when the violence comes to the workplace. I showed you earlier that website that just showed this huge list, the longest list of all the incidents of, a victim being killed at work because the abuser knew that he could find her there. One point I maybe have to see if we got time for this, but as any business owner knows, one of the biggest costs, especially now, is regarding health care. And that decides whether the size of your staff, it decides many factors. And one thing that places like the CDC have determined is that victims have much higher health care costs than, let's say, the average population. There's a great resource where you could look at, oh, Joan, I should probably show it, shouldn't I? I was going to see if we had time for it, and then I cut it out because I didn't think we had time. But what I'm going to ask folks to do is, if it's possible, to please, if you could, in the questions area, I need some help here. What I'm going to do is ask some attendees just to talk about their workplace, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to indicate the number of people in a typical workplace. So in your questions tab, I just need an example. Could someone type in like, oh, our workplace has 200, 500 employees. Just want to get a poll from somebody out there. Okay, great. I got someone, and someone's putting out there, they're saying they've got an example of their workplace has 560, roughly 560 people. And the next question I have is how many of those are female, of that percentage of that total workforce? Because again, we find that much more victims are female than male, especially with the physical violence. Okay, that person saying it's roughly 50-50. And then I know this is a tough one, but the average hourly wage, what we're doing is we're trying to determine the cost of the abuse. And okay, I know it's a rough figure, but the person's putting out there $18 an hour. And what we could do then is we could look at the cost, and this is from a major Texas health chain came up with this spreadsheet, and we can expect 110 victimizations. It might be the same person being victimized or just a handful of folks, but we're seeing the number of victimizations within the past year. Looking at the medical cost for the employer, and this is estimated by, well, this is back in 2008 figures, looking at 58,000. The cost of mental health care, looking around 29,000. The cost of productivity in terms of absenteeism, paying for sick leave days, looking at 25,000, for a total of over $100,000 that this employer could be paying due to the abuse. And this is, we're not talking about any shots fired, any on the workplace, any lawsuits against the company, just strictly the impact of the abuse. So if anyone wants a copy of this spreadsheet, let me know, and we can sure share that with you. But that's, again, what I want to demonstrate is that's just looking at healthcare costs and the sick leave aspect. Beyond that, if we could get down to some real nitty-gritty figures, it is a real challenge to find out exactly the cost, but two studies that were well done. By the way, there's this number that's thrown out here a lot, saying $3 to $5 billion a year. But when you try to look at the methodology of how they figured that, it's a little bit looser. These two quotes were done from a much more, I guess, empirical method of getting to the figure. Tennessee, which is just north of us in Alabama, we could look at the estimate is $174 million a year on businesses. Then the CDC did a similar study, finding a much larger figure. Oh, by the way, of course, this is just Tennessee, so we're one small state, and it's not a very heavily populated state like California. You could just imagine, just multiply that by 50 and then add some more. We could see this figure being pretty realistic about the cost of lost wages, productivity, sick leave, and all those different factors. Looking at that, when we break this down about how this actually comes out to play, here's a study done by an excellent organization called the Corporate Alliance to End Partner Violence. They are an organization dedicated to this cause, and they do great work. And they did a really good study, again, working with others. And you could see some of these figures. 44% of the victims who are employed say that they've had direct issues with intimate partner violence. IPV stands for intimate partner violence. Some people refer to it as domestic violence. Another term is intimate partner violence. But most of the women, some of the men, a good large prevention, discovered or reported some sort of work interruptions, phone calls, visits. They needed to leave work because of the abusive behavior. And one factor is, even though we're concerned about the employees, the victim employees themselves, one thing that they found in this study was that coworkers had an issue. So it's someone who's not in a relationship at all or in a healthy relationship, the fact that they have to cover their coworkers' time dealing with something. Somehow maybe they were interrupted and hassled as well. We found that they were affected. It just struck me. I've looked at this figure a lot, and it's interesting that 19% of men, but 32% of women reported that a coworker DV situation impacted them. It just struck me. Are women perhaps more aware of the issue, and then men maybe it was impacting them, but they didn't realize it was a domestic violence situation? So I'm real curious about that figure. It just hit me. This is pretty stunning. The number of days that victims actually miss work due to the abuse. The biggest cost is of course when you're paying for sick leave, giving them salary or hourly wage, and they're not there. They're physically not there. A different study, and by the way, I'm not going to show you all the studies that are out there, but I just want to highlight some bigger ones. The one reason I also enjoy sharing these is because we hope that the state of Maine's Department of Labor has a real sort of objective. I'm sure they're all objective, but when a shelter or an agency like myself, I've got an axe to grind, sort of something to push out there, this message, but you have a sort of ideally a objective, clear third party who's trying to look at this objectively. Well, I try to look at it objectively as well, but here we're having a third party look at the situation and look at these figures. Just stunning. I mean, of course, if your life's going to pot and you're terrified, how can you concentrate? So, so many victims are not able to focus in on work. So many arrive late for work. So many have victims come to work. And by the way, this late arrival can be due to the abuser failing to take a child to daycare, using up all the gas, flattening the tires, just having a huge fight just before you're heading out the door, which is really a tactic to make them late for work. And later I'll talk about that a little bit more about the reason for those tactics. Just moving on, 13%, oh my goodness, were assaulted while at work. And of course as horrible as that is, if we're just callously looking at dollar figures, what you're talking about is opening up for liability. You've just, in a sense, had a violation of that OSHA general duty clause. And then this is something which is a reality. Roughly 60% of the victims are fired or they quit due to the abuse. And when someone's terminated, there's a lot of different things between were they asked to terminate, were they outright fired? I mean, were they asked to quit? Were they outright fired? They just quit on their own. Victims often go through so much that they just cannot manage keeping their jobs, and that's, like I was saying, a real tactic of the abuser. Now, while we talked a little bit about the abuse at home and how it impacted, one thing we find is that in another study that I found, I'm sorry I don't have this quoted, but another study is that the abusers continually, if I could use that term, like the stalking behavior, the phone calls, the emails, the text messages, the visits, which are truly interruptive, that really cause a disturbance in the workplace. If I could give an example, you might hear about this guy who drops his girlfriend off for work, meets her for lunch, picks her up, calls, checks in, drops by with flowers, and other people see that and go, wow, what an attentive boyfriend. He must be really smitten with you. And it's pretty obvious from the victim's demeanor how they respond to that, how they feel. Yeah, you always think those fairy tale romances and, they just can't stand any minute away from each other. That's awesome. But you could very obviously tell when the victims are anxious and nervous during those visits that occur, and this anxiety about returning the call right away. Joan, I know you probably have stories about victims having rules, like you cannot let their cell phone ring 3 times, more than 3 times when the abuser is calling. It's that kind of control that's just amazing.
Yeah, and it's certainly all part of that that need to keep someone in line, that this is how the relationship needs to continue. And also the hallmark of an abuser is the jealousy.
Yeah.
And that they're constantly checking on them because they're accusing them of being with someone else, and so being at work. They may work with a lot of men, and so they may be constantly being harassed about their relationships at work.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's one case. Some of you might have been to my presentations before. You might know this answer. If you don't know this answer, please, in the questions area, I'm going to ask that you type in, like open up your little user interface, and there's a question. You could submit a question. Instead of a question, can you please submit your estimation and the number of times this guy called, poor Colleen, her name is Colleen, calls her at work. She breaks up with him. She's the administrative assistant, receptionist there at the software firm, and she's answering the phones. He's calling. Come on, folks, light up my questions tab. I want to know, how many times do you think this guy called in one day? So in that little question, oh boy, here it comes in. We got a whole bunch. They're all coming in. We got 60, we got 25, we got 100, we got 32. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Boy, but I have to say, we're going to blow you all away. He called 600 times in a single day, and I think they even stopped counting. He just sat there, redial, 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 and here we see this demonstration of not only is he harassing her and bothering her, but the work, the company could not function if a legitimate client was calling. The phone was busy the whole time, and there you see, not a single shot's been fired, not any violence actually committed, but the abuse has a huge impact on the workplace. Oh, and by the way, that workplace was that phone number was an 800 number, and those are really expensive to maintain. He was calling from a payphone, so you could just imagine just the dollar figure impact of that. So thanks for sharing, everyone. I appreciate you throwing it in. Now, the worst, the thing we always want to really avoid and never think about is actual violence. And as I said, there's so many incidents of violence because the one place the perpetrator can find the victim is at work. Now, I don't know how you put a dollar figure. Actually, I just read an article on that. How you put a dollar figure on someone's life. Obviously, I think everyone here agrees you can't. But in terms of that act of violence, if I was a risk manager type, we could sure look at these dollar figures. There's cleanup costs of these things, and I've been involved with that directly, and it's not cheap. They will shut down the place. See this yellow tape? I don't know if you've ever seen that. They will shut down the entire neighborhood, even a business neighborhood. And you're not impacting the one store, the entire mall could be taken down or into lockdown and shut down, and the impact could be easily in the millions then. Long-term cost to public health, and then I'm going to discuss some of the legal issues in a little bit. The one point I want to emphasize is just to show you some more figures. While we could talk about a homicide, there's been some other figures. I realize this is older data, but I've had some trouble finding more recent ones regarding occupational issues. But you could look at the average number of days missed, and then the totals, like how many total days were missed during this year. Well, a long time ago, but those figures could certainly be a lot higher. The other factor I want to emphasize is, again, there's good evidence showing that women truly are in danger of this threat. I know everyone's like, oh, terrorist and some kid in a black trench coat, or is going to kill me. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little political here, but the reality is, for women, the main threat inside and outside of the workplace is going to be someone that you know. And for this study, it was done in North Carolina. Empirically sound study, 75%, literally 3/4 of the murders at work were committed by ex-partners. So it's not, the disgruntled client or coworker. That's the major threat, and there's plenty of evidence there. Some more figures. God, I can go on with these figures on and on. I'm sorry I don't have the more recent ones available. I could pull up the direct charts, but just to show you the rough figures of the homicides. And by the way, some of these figures that I'm showing you here, this happens at work, during work. So if the victim is arriving for work, before they quote unquote clock in, like they're pulling into the parking lot and he shoots her, that's not included in these figures because they're not actually clocked in yet. So we look at those kind of situations, or if they're after work and they're leaving their job site and they get killed, the figures could be a lot higher. While we I want to talk a little bit about liability, but then I started talking about legal issues. I realized there's a lot of things we need to discuss in terms of employment law. And again, I'm not going to concentrate entirely on this. I'm also not an attorney, so please don't take anything I say as legal advice. But broadly, we could look at the employment rights, about discrimination issues, things like that for the employee. And I'll talk about this a lot more actually when we discuss employment as a workforce barrier when we talk about that next week. But then the other factor is, of course, if there is an incident, a violent incident, then there's laws regulating the compensation and potential liability for that employer. So I'll go over just a couple of these. While we're really focusing in on Alabama State, through the work with the coalition, I have to say that there's sort of limited number of specific laws that apply to this issue. One certainly is broadly for any person who's subpoenaed to go to court. It's within the code that legally your employer must let you go to court if you have a subpoena, and so victims very often need to go to court to testify, and they're protected in their job that way. A number of years ago, there was an attempt for a bill to allow paid sick leave for issues, and this might be not just to go to court, but to work with the detective, to move out of their house, maybe getting a restraining order, seeking counseling, medical care, trying to get that covered under sick leave, but that did not pass, and I'm sure at some point it may be reintroduced. Other states have these, and other states, certainly have a lot of different other provisions. Just focusing in again about that employment protection issues, one factor that does apply, because this is a federal law, is we have the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, and please understand that victims often have high medical issues and mental health issues, that could also fit under that category. So employers must allow victims time off. It must depend upon the size of your organization and things like that, and their position, like whether part-time or full-time. But along with the victims themselves, also family members. So if my sister starts going through something, I could take off time from work to care for my sister or my daughter or whoever it might be as well to address their needs. So there is some protection there that they could keep their job while they take a leave of absence. I mean, they can return to their job. Now, I'm sorry, I know I'm throwing some outside state examples, but just to show you the national picture of this situation, one factor is when a victim is fired due to their domestic violence situation, what we call discrimination. In one case, it's really tough. It's state by state, but one case that I was personally involved with was a bus driver. And actually, he was a man. This is a male who was shot by his, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was his wife or his girlfriend. But it wasn't at work. This was off work, but due to the concerns about the threat and the danger that was posed, he was fired. Later on, he died, but the estate was trying to get compensation, stating it was a discrimination that he was fired just for being a victim. But it went all the way to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and they said, yep, they do have the right to fire one at will. This is one of those issues around at-will employment state, whether you have the right or not, just to, aside from discrimination issues protected by Title VII, you can let someone go for whatever reasons. It's a big issue. Hopping over, discussing about should there be a violent incident, one thing I want to discuss is, and this relates to the issue about assaults in the workplace and the cost of those assaults, is workers' compensation. Please understand that, in my view, workers' compensation is a employer benefit, and by that I mean what it does is it limits the victims, the aggrieved parties' ability to seek any compensation besides just the cost and some lost wages. Huge issue around domestic violence. The big issue is workers' compensation is generally allotted to those who are injured due to an incident arising, well, I'll start with the second one, in the course of employment. Oh, look, I put that in there twice. Let me fix that. In the course of employment, and what that means is, of course, while you're working, and that's obvious, like if you're on the job site or if you're working at the moment. But more importantly, in particular with domestic violence cases, is when it arises out of employment, meaning was it because you were working that you were hurt? And in general, it's not seen as the fact. This is a recent case that got a lot of attention, and again, it's an outside case in South Dakota, but it's just really horrible. Again, we have this, young woman, and kills me, it tears me up when we hear about young children. What they're trying to get is the workers' compensation to cover her average, to provide the two-thirds of, was it two-thirds of her weekly wage for the children, and to help cover her funeral costs as well. Well, it's looking like not going to move forward. I got to find out the latest of this case. But, the attorneys for the employer saying, hey, look, we can't say every time a victim is hurt at work due to their personal relationship, we can't allow this to open up, because then we're going to have the floodgates opened up where so many claims would come through, because, like I said, 75% of the women killed are killed by ex-husbands. That's where we've got the issue. Now, if they were killed from a robbery, like they were working the cash register and someone shot them during the robbery, they would get the benefit. But it had nothing to do with her job, why it occurred. Let me just find another horrific incident where these were actually co-workers. Usually there's greater liability when the employee is the perpetrator, because there's negligent hiring, retention, and supervision liabilities there. So they're coworkers, they're dating, she breaks up with him. He continues to hassle her and bother her. In fact, he's such a problem in the workplace, they put him on sort of administrative leave, saying, take some sick leave days and deal with this. I'm sorry, I see there's a question coming up. Can other coworkers who are injured in the course of the deviance get, yes, that's exactly where I'm going here. So he comes in while he's on sick leave, uses his little key card to enter, kills her in front of the other employees. Now, I don't have that. So that she's dying. And I'm sorry, this is graphic. She's severely injured, dying, and her supervisor is holding her in his arms. Just naturally just trying to care for her. She dies. She applies for workers' compensation to pay for those costs and things like that, and it's denied. Why? Because it had nothing to do, even though they're coworkers, it was denied. However, the supervisor who held her, and you can imagine the emotional trauma from that, he gets post-traumatic stress disorder, diagnosis PTSD. He applies for workers' compensation, and it was awarded to him because as his job to care for employees, he was doing his job caring for her, that was in the course of employment. So it just shows you, how twisted this all could be. Now, as I mentioned before, workers' compensation is a benefit for the employers so that employees cannot sue the company, like damage, like what's that called? Like the punitive damages, in a sense, to punish the employer for such aggravating circumstances. Because victims cannot get workers' compensation, then it actually opens the door. So it's actually a bad thing of employers, because now they could go for the lawsuit, if that makes sense. Again, I'm not an attorney, and I'm trying to be more familiar with Alabama law and cases, but I've not found any except for one that I'll show you in a little bit. Because victims cannot apply for workers' compensation, it does open up the avenue for a lawsuit. And again, I'm not an attorney, but what we see here is the basis of any sort of third-person, third-party liability. The third party being the property owner or the employer. One is the legal duty, and that's kind of always covered by the whole OSHA thing, the general clause: maintain a safe workplace free of recognized harm. And the proof is now, what did the employer or the property owner do to breach that duty? What how did they fail to implement security? And there was somehow proof that there was failure, and then somehow there was negligence. The employer did not follow through with this issue. Let me just go, I'll have a few thoughts about that, but let me go off for a couple of examples. One note for any advocates out there, employers, you might be mad at me for talking about this, but there's one organization called the National Crime Victim Bar Association. It's a bar association like any other attorney group, but this one specifically helps victims of crime obtain civil remedies. And you can look them up, and they will help. They could try suing the abuser themselves or third parties. And here's just a few cases. The one thing that I want to emphasize is that these are really limited. I have a few more to demonstrate, but there's not that many, and I'm really sort of surprised about that. Maybe I can get on LexisNexis and dig up a few more, but I want to point your attention to the one Alabama case there at the bottom, and this went up to the Supreme Court here in the state. And in this situation, what we see is what we could demonstrate is the clear foreknowledge. A woman was harassed and threatened and terrified of her husband. There's an incident that occurs. The police come. So there's a well-known, the fact that the police responded to the scene, to the workplace before, it pretty much shows foreknowledge that there's a risk there. The next day she's saying, hey, I don't want to come into work. I'm still concerned. The manager says, hey, you've got to work. You must work. And then put her in a vulnerable place. We can argue it's a vulnerable place, being out on the front floor in front of the cash register. Comes in, kills her. So there was a lawsuit. One thing we found is, again, this is over 13 years ago, but we found that the court ruled in favor of the employer. So the lawsuit fell through. A couple of notes here. One thing I want to say is whether this might be a win for the employer, they still spent tens of thousands of dollars. There's a huge cost here, even though in a sense they quote-unquote won the case. This might sound cynical, but there's sort of a cliche that the only one who wins in a court hearing is the attorneys. Because they're the ones who are going to collect the fees no matter what. And I'm not saying that for all attorneys. There's many great attorneys out there. Another case that I follow pretty closely is a horrible case where it's not just the victims, the domestic violence victim applying for this issue, but others as well. 9 people were killed, and it's the clients, it's the people who are just bystanders who were killed. They filed a lawsuit and it was settled. I think that we know more about more lawsuits if they weren't settled out of court, and we don't know the issues around that. So did I convince you, or do you believe me? You've got to look at domestic violence as a employment issue. With the time that we have remaining, I want to address what we could do about it from here. Broadly, the big steps are recognize the abuse, communicate, get the word out there, and offer support and protection for those victims. While I talked earlier about the impact, all that impact issues relate to the job performance as well. We could see that as an employer, these things give you, if I can call it the excuse to talk to the victims. You're not getting into the quote-unquote their business, you're getting into your business, talking about the absenteeism and the repeat phone calls and things like that. Joan, I know I'm trying to move through with the time that we have left, but is there anything you want to add about how maybe you could tell if someone's being a victim? Are there any warning signs aside from these job performance issues?
Yeah, and I think it is important to look at job performance and to remember that these are indicators. It doesn't necessarily mean there's domestic violence, but it's very important to recognize and take that opportunity to talk about it, because victims are routinely made to feel unimportant and that it is their fault, and they're not going to talk about this easily. So if there's a climate in their workplace where they feel that they will be able to talk to a supervisor or to someone else to help them, one of the things I think that's important to remember, that this is for the employer's benefit as well as the safety of the victim, because if someone is talking to you about the possibility of harassment or someone coming on the premises, then you're going to be prepared. If someone doesn't feel comfortable doing that, then it could be a surprise, and so you need to think about how it's a benefit for someone to be able to talk about it. And some of the other things to look for when there are obvious injuries, is someone dressing inappropriately with long sleeves. It's 90 degrees and they're wearing turtlenecks and long sleeves to hide injuries. Again, looking at the absenteeism and the impact on their performance. Many phone calls, Johnny mentioned before, this elaborate attention that may be paid could raise some flags. Just to be aware of how the potential victim may be behaving, and just listening is the most important thing.
Yes.
It's okay to just approach someone and say, you seem to be troubled. You don't have to say, gee, you look like a victim of domestic violence. That's not
right.
Anyone open up.
That's right, and it's really different. Later on, hopefully we'll have time to talk about. I get more training that's available about working with victims. The real complexities. I just want to give 2 quick warnings, if I may, from my personal experience of dealing with all this. It's just really easy, very easy to sort of say, why don't you leave him? Why are you in this situation? And my experience is to avoid asking this question. It's very much judging them. Of course, they've thought about it as well. So just one tip that I could provide. The other tip is of course, you care about them and you want to support them, so there's a real sense of, oh my goodness, oh Sally, I'm so sorry, we got to get you out of this. And you're right, we want them out of that violent, abusive relationship, but they have to leave safely. And so there's questions about pushing them, like really encouraging them to leave. I personally believe it really has to be their decision, and the most important thing you need to understand is I'd argue one of the biggest triggers, if I can use the word trigger, for a homicide is when the victims leave. So realize when you're helping them leave, you are greatly increasing theirs and maybe your chance of getting shot. Just a reality. Later on, we're going to talk about threat assessments and security measures at another webinar.
Yeah, and
Please.
I would just like to emphasize that it's a very tough decision. It can take someone 4, 5, 6 times before they leave and are able to say that it's not their choice, it's the abuser's choice on how they're going to stalk or threaten or harm anyone, so that they have to make that decision and do it as safely as possible. And that's why referring to services, there are people who are available, and probably the best thing anyone can do is to be a resource yourself, and it's really pretty simple, and that's just to know the statewide hotline number.
Yeah.
And to write this down, and you are a resource, and there's nothing else that you would have to do other than to give this number that's up on the screen, the 1-800-50-6522.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I know there's so many things. I also have this map up here. Again, we really want to focus in on Alabama with the partnership with the coalition. But, if we have people from out of state, that earlier number that I showed, you all know how to use Google, right? Google domestic violence shelter for your neighborhood, it'll pop right up. But right here, for those of us within the state, you could see the breadth of organizations that have the entire state covered, and they could offer quite a bit of support for your entity. Now, there's things that certainly the shelter can do for providing direct support for the victims. There's a lot of things that you can provide, employers can provide, and let's just go over a couple of these in detail. The number one or one big issue is time off, because victims need to go to court, moving, going to the counselor, going to the police department. They're going to be out of sick leave. That's my personal experience pretty quickly. So how can you be creative with flex time, with rescheduling, pooled time? I've done that as well, like where people, kind of put their vacation days into a kitty to help cover someone else's issues or things that they need. There's all opportunities, and again, I mentioned Family Medical Leave Act, which might provide a mandate to allow them to force you to say, hey, you got to give them some time off, and they'll have their job when they come back. I just showed there's a lot of other places that have more accommodation laws regarding time off, although I'm not familiar with any in Alabama. If you wanted to look around, one of my favorite websites is Legal Momentum, and they have a really good website that tracks nationally what the laws are and bills. However, let's go back to you. Let's talk about that HR. I'm really talking to human resources folks now. It's really important that you look at your emergency contact information. I know I got, when I fill out those little forms, I put my wife's phone number and name and email down. Well, if the abuser is the one who killed her, you're not going to call them for the emergency contact, so update that. Also, victims often move and they're in shelter and hiding, and the abuser, the stalker, is looking for them. So please be aware. There's crazy, crazy stories out there when abusers do go through great lengths, impersonating an officer, or whatever, to get that new address. So don't be surprised if someone breaks into your office with a crowbar to get to your personnel files to dig up that new address. The other factor is, that 401k beneficiary information or death insurance, or I'm sorry, death insurance, that's what it is, life insurance policies. The beneficiary is whoever's name's on it. And it's something that typically people don't think about when they're in a crisis. Oh, what did I sign that piece of paper 12 years ago, 20 years ago? Go back and update that beneficiary information. As well. And then one thing that you could do is often people have direct deposit into a joint checking account, help the victims get a paper check, or we talked earlier about economic control. Victims sometimes don't know how to open a bank account. This is where the DV advocates can really help, but you all can help as well, just to stop the payments, because the abusers will be draining that bank account. Then generally, for the employers, what can we do there? What can we do to offer that support? Now, later on, I'm going to talk about security issues that are very important, but, there's many things that you could do in terms of if they're in charge of answering the phone, well, maybe someone else could screen those calls first. Understanding during job performance evaluations, all things like that. I understand you need to be consistent with other employees, but realize that it's not the victim's fault what they're going through, and that's the heart of it. Now, this is it's a little speech. I always have like 5 minutes in an elevator to talk to someone. The one thing I emphasize is it's really easy to fire the victim employees, and you might have, in a sense, justification to do so. The main factor you have to realize is that other victims will not disclose. If you let that problem go and that problem's out the door, what you've just done is you've told every single employee, don't talk about your problems, don't let them know about the next threatening situation, and that's a security risk. So there's some real challenge points about why you don't want to just fire the victims. And then please understand, again, it's about the reason I emphasize that is because it's often coworkers who may come forward about an issue, and if they say, hey, Sally might get fired, I'm not going to talk, well, you just limited your awareness of the situation in your workforce. There's a lot of reasons why people don't report. The main thing I want to jump right into, I'm speaking quickly, I just want to make sure we finish on time. I want to address abusers in the workplace. While there's a lot of great work and advances about supporting victims at work, we need to hold abusers accountable as well. One quick note is I'm not going to really do any kind of because you can't do any sort of like assessment of how you tell someone's an abuser employee, like one of your employees, a domestic violence perpetrator, because they're so good at hiding it, and there's no real set story. The one way you are going to find out about it is they're in jail. Like that's the big clue, that they got charged with assaulting a female and they're in jail. That's how you found out about the incident. However, there's a lot of other things that if you look into it, there's ways you can tell in terms of they're using the company resources like their time, like the car, even their coworkers to commit the abuse, meaning they will ask their coworkers who's the driver, hey, swing by this workplace, see if she's talking to any guys, things such as that. There's been a fewer studies, and I could rattle off more of them, but it's been proven that abuser employees, they've got issues as well with using up company resources. Here's another study, again, with the state of Maine, looking at the cost to the employers just for the abuser's side of the issues. So let's say even if the victim lives at home as sort of a homemaker, that abuser employee also, as I'm demonstrating here, has an impact as well. One crazy case of a guy almost like cutting through his safety chaps while he's cutting down a tree because he's thinking about what that woman's doing. Is she talking to another guy? He's in this state of rage in his mind, this jealousy fit. He put himself at risk. Even if you don't care about him falling from the tree, that's a cost to the employer as well. There's public relations issues. The main thing I want to move forward to is what I often suggest, I think we're going to have real impact on our communities, is put it in your workplace violence policy that their out of office behavior, their off-duty conduct has an impact as well. If they're committing violent acts, if they're being abusers, you could put it out there, hey, we don't hire people like that, and you are protected from firing people. Or how should I put it? You have a right to let people go if they are convicted of a crime for various reasons, for the public image on your business. This happens a lot with like the big wigs who do this. They end up like quitting from the board or resigning. But also, basic moral turpitude. We just don't have people like that. Can you imagine someone who's, rapes a small child? Well, heck, you would never employ them. Well, same idea. You could just say we don't have folks like that working here. The main thing I want to emphasize is please look at abuser treatment or batterer interventions program. It is not about anger. Joan mentioned at the beginning, and it's not about marriage counseling. Believe me, I understand. There's a role for marital counseling, not in abusive control relationships. And yes, substance abuse is often a factor, but it's not the cause. So you can't just say, oh, he's got a drinking problem, go to AA meetings. It's a much bigger issue. What we can do, where can we go from here, is develop a policy, have procedures in place, and as soon as you have that framework installed, then roll it out to your employees. Do trainings, have an internal awareness campaign. One thing I want to offer is the plenty of models out there. On my site, there's the free folders, Google folders, where you can get resources, policies, training tools. Workplaces Respond, you can Google that. They've got like a little tool that creates policies based on your industry, so that could work. And then I've named some partners here. And then one thing I got my hands right on it, the Alabama Coalition has a great booklet as well with model policies, procedures available, and we could sure make that available to you as well.
And Johnny, that's on the website. That
Very good.
Can download it.
Okay, great. On the website, searching in here, you've got the right there. Right on the front page, there you can go get the information that Joan was just describing. It's all there. The question is not about finding things. It's all readily available. The a couple of points. I know we're just about at time, but I just wanted to emphasize an important issue is, I do a lot of trainings and annual trainings, biannual trainings. Those are important, but the people who are really good at this, like the heroes that I've worked with in the business community, they tell me that it's the repeat messages that let the employees know, hey, we're here to help, we're here to help, we're here to help. And what they do is they put in flyers in the bathroom. They have lunch and learn series. They put in the employee break room a little flyer. And it's not just doing that training. I know policies are important and it's a legal issue, but it really comes down to the actual work practices. Do people know that the employer is a safe place to go to get their support or to report their coworkers. One little note about that is whatever policies and great flyers and good design you've got on those flyers, it really comes down to the trust of the employees trusting management. And no webinar is going to teach that, right? Or no policy you put into place. It comes down from the history of how your management has handled employee issues, and it's known. Your workforce knows how the employer handles things. If we see, such as the case with the woman getting the 600 phone calls, she was so incredibly supported by her workforce and by management that the whole company was behind her, and that of course led to greater employee loyalty and things like that. So just as I mentioned here, I could show you clips of coworkers saying, hey, I'll never work for anywhere else, I love this place. And that you can't buy that. You literally cannot buy that from your employees. I know it's a tough job market out there, but there's a lot to be said for having a workplace that really cares. And then get it out there. When you're doing this care and you support domestic violence initiatives, it's a factor. I'm going to do a plug right here. I'm standing holding my right hand, my very expensive phone. I use Verizon, and I chose Verizon specifically because of their support for domestic violence initiatives. And there's other. You all know the other options out there, but I give them a check every month because I know part of that is going to the good work that they do. Finally, I really want to emphasize this little thing. I know I'm getting a little preachy here, but it's the truth that when we're talking about domestic violence in the workplace and how we can prevent that, it's always going to impact your business with your employees, your clients, your stakeholders, your owners. It's always a threat, and it'll always be an issue while it's in our community. So we've got to really address these things in our community. In particular, I really encourage supporting domestic violence agencies by, they're all nonprofits, so cut a check. But there's other things you can do. You could offer, I see there's I'm sorry, let me just interrupt myself here. Someone had a question, do you get a certificate? Yes, you'll get a link to a web page where you can download a certificate, and you have to enter in your name and the webinar title. But yes, you will get a certificate of attendance after this. If I could just go back, there's a lot of things you can do for agencies outside, such as giving equipment, giving time. They're always looking for board members that have your skill set, marketing people, accountant, security folks. Offer those services, because literally what I'm saying is until it's really reduced down in your community, you're always going to have that threat in the workplace. The bottom line is, please go ahead. Yes.
I'd just like to add that your local program, which you can find from our website, be one of your best friends when it comes to learning about domestic violence, as well as having a resource for anyone who is a victim or an abuser, so that the information and resources of your programs, that's something that they can do for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's an excellent point. They are a tremendous, tremendous resource, training, consultation. If you have an actual threat, to understand the dynamics of the victims and the abusers when you're doing the threat assessment, it's really important because it really is unique from other kinds of threats. And we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. Hey, the one thing I want to mention is, if you all are heading off on the 22nd, we're going to be talking more about domestic violence, particularly as a workforce development issues. And then for those of us, especially in Alabama, we're going to talk about the new Guns at Work law and how it applies within the domestic violence context, but then broadly also with your workplace violence policy. And then, sorry, this is the words or letters are cut off, but we'll be covering more specifically about threat assessment and developing security measures within the context of the DV threat. Golly, we're just about a little over. Does anyone have any questions? You can pop them into the questions area and I can read them out. Again, if you have any more questions, always reply right back to that email. You know how to reach Joan through the Alabama Coalition's website, and you know how to reach me. I'm still sort of pausing here if there's any other points or questions. Great. Well, I want to thank you so much. At the end of this webinar, you will get a copy of this actual slides, a link to these slides, and then also there should be a link to the recording of this incident. So thank you so much. Joan, thank you so much. Was there any other points you wanted to make? Any final words?
Just wanted to thank you and looking forward to the next 3 sessions.
Absolutely. Yes, please join us for these others as well. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.